All right, well, good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. We have the few, the faithful, who made it to the final session of the day. I knew that was just always going to be the challenge going last, but hopefully we've saved the best for last. I'm excited to be here with you. My name is Lee Scott. I'm the CEO with Unleashing Leaders, and I know many of you here in the audience. It's great to see you guys again and some new faces as well. We do strategic planning, leadership development, and then change management, and of course Lean Six Sigma process improvement, which is what we'll be talking about today. And I have with me my partner in crime, an Unleashed leader in her own right, is Janine Dodson. She is the manager of business process innovation at EDD. And today we're going to be showcasing some of the successes we've had with just one of their programs. They've actually had several programs that are doing it, doing it large, doing it small, doing it in a very full-time, disciplined fashion, doing it in a part-time, incremental fashion, all of the above. So we're just highlighting one of their successes here today. And we have some of those team members here as well, so they can correct me on the math when I'm going through this today. So let's jump on into it. So why would you be interested in showing up today? And perhaps some of you have some of these same types of challenges. Perhaps you are in a position where you're trying to deliver a valuable service to Californians, and yet you're struggling with some challenges. Maybe you're struggling to be able to meet service levels. The UI program, unemployment insurance program that I'm talking about today, was struggling to meet federally mandated service levels that required, 80% of this, 87% of that. And when we started, we're in the 60s with their percentages, trying to meet those service levels. And not despite a lot of hard work, but they were certainly striving to do that. And they were relying on heroics to be able to do this in the face of shrinking resources. And so that was kind of the context and the situation that we're in, and I'm sure not unlike some of the challenges that you guys are facing. Although some of you, maybe you're saying, hey, no, actually, we're actually meeting the levels, and we're doing pretty good, and we actually have decent resources, but I've got these great ideas I've always wanted to do, and I've just never had the time to do it. And so this program might also be helpful for you as well, because what we did is we self-funded these teams through the improvements that we're making that created space to go do even more cool things that we've been talking about doing in the field for 10 years, but there was always the excuse we never didn't have enough time. And this was a way of creating the time to do those innovations. So if you want to be if this is part of your world and part of your challenge, the theme that we had for this project was catching the wave of innovation. So we got to do a little wave here, and also make sure you don't get any emboli or thrombosis as you're sitting through session after session day. So we're going to start on this side of the room where Kathy and Pat are at, all right? And when you on go, you guys just go ahead and stand up. We'll do a little wave from this side of the room to that side of the room. Ready? And go. All right, there it is, there it is. It's going, it's going, it's going, it's going. All right, wow, pretty good for the first try. You want to do that, like half the people are like, I don't even know what's going on right now. Good, well, let's see if this side could do even better, okay? Because they were pretty good. Let's see if we can be better on this side, all right? You guys ready? And go! There it is, there it is. Catch the wave, catch the wave. Nice, nice. Okay, a little bit of stretch in there. And it really is changes like that. It's really hard at first, and that's what everybody tends to focus on. But the cool thing is once you get that momentum going, it unleashes and it just starts to radiate out, and success begets more success. And that's what we want to help share with you, a little bit of a story to maybe have you be the next ripple in that wave that's happening across the state. So a little bit about EDD. Janine, why don't you jump on up and share some of the story here and what's happening?
Right, so let me do this. I'm going to be tethered to this mic here. Can you hear me? Okay. So for those of you that came to the morning session and saw me there, at EDD, right now I would say we serve about 17 million Californians through our we call them our big four branches: our unemployment insurance, disability insurance, our tax branch, and our workforce services branch. We at the time that we started with the UI project, as Lee said, we had some challenges with some of our service levels, and that wasn't just within UI, but we found an opportunity to build a strong team through a federal grant that we received. So at EDD, we help job seekers get back to work through our workforce services branch, our unemployment insurance, and our disability insurance provide benefit payment, and then our tax branch, they collect employer taxes. So I'd say last employee count, we're just under 8,000 strong at EDD. We've got a lot of dedicated folks within our department that are providing those services. So much like many of the other state organizations, we deal with, I remember when I started with the state service, someone said, get in with a agency that's federally funded, because then you don't have to worry about like getting laid off through general fund, right? Yeah,
right.
I remember like back in '96 when I was joining the state. So, well, you know, we had our challenges too, and it's how do we continue to serve our customers? How do we continue to perform and meet federal measures when our budgets are being cut? You know, we have these swings in workload. If some of you are in production environment, you've got turnover, you've got our baby boomers retiring out. So we had a lot of challenges at EDD at the time that we formed our unemployment insurance business process innovation team. Okay, so this is the integrated strategy that we use, and I'm going to throw something else in there that's not in there because folks bring it out. Do you remember TQM, Total Quality Management? So we got some of that in there too, but what we did is at EDD, we take an integrated strategy, so we utilize Agile Project Management. It's very fast-paced. For those of you that are familiar with Agile Project Management, the great thing about it is you start to deliver results very quickly. Literally within 30 days, you are delivering results. Very big for our particular team. Six Sigma, we use that very data-driven. Okay, if you're not familiar with Six Sigma, our leadership is about making data-driven decisions, and Six Sigma allows us to be able to provide the data to help them, but also there are times where we have to make decisions that might be a little bit more politically driven, right? Well, we can go to the table and have that discussion as to why we think we need to move in a different direction based on the data. With Lean, it really focuses on going faster, and I'll tell you, with most of our customers, if you ask them what they want from us at EDD, they want us to go faster. It's, I want my UI benefit payment faster. I want my DI benefit payment faster. And the other thing that I love about Lean is it allows us to look at, there's 8 forms of waste that you typically see. Lee is going to cover them later. I think our team, that was some of our favorite work, was identifying the various waste in our processes, and then not only that, identifying it, talking about it, right? Because it's usually the big pink elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. And then identifying solutions through our data-driven methodology to be able to eliminate some of that waste. And then theory of constraints, another big favorite of mine. The concept there is you're only as strong as your weakest link. So that's where we put our resources. We identify where our bottlenecks are, where our critical constraints are, and that's where we put our resources. So we really are celebrating this integrated strategy at EDD. We've taken the best of the best, basically. But it also helps us really incorporate strategies and methodologies, even some that were like tried and true that we used 20 years ago through total quality management as well. So again, we serve about 17 million Californians. We have, I'd say, 5,000 plus. We have field offices up and down the state. And the way we structured our unemployment insurance team is we had myself at the time. I was the project manager. They have a fabulous project manager. I don't know if she's in the room. No. Okay, so they have an awesome project manager now. We had a core team that was dedicated 100%. We pulled them off of their day-to-day work. They served on our team for about 12 to 18 months. So the structure that we have at EDD is people come off the team 12 to 18 months. They serve our tour of duty, as we call it. They go back, and they're change agents when they come to us, but they go back to their field offices, they go back to their organization, they start sharing out the methodologies and the strategies and what they've learned. We do have advisors on our larger teams. These are some of our subject matter experts. These are the folks that introduce us to the folks that we need to talk with when we're involving all of our stakeholders in the process. We always have I'm kind of bouncing around. Division chiefs, a lot of our larger branches have a division chief structure. They serve as our steering committee members in many ways. And we have our executive champion, which is typically the deputy director of that particular branch. Very successful. We've rolled this out in the UI program. We have implemented it as well in our DI program. We have a team that started later last year, I guess you can say. And then Unleashing Leaders came in, and what they do is they provide that coaching and consulting. Because we want to build bench depth in-house. Like, no offense to Lee. I mean, he's fantastic, right? But we want to start building that bench depth in-house and transferring the knowledge, building the capacity. So that's what they've done with me by putting me on that particular project, because I worked in director's office when I was given the assignment to move to the UI program for a year, learn everything that I learned as project manager. Now at the director's office level, I share it out through our department with other project managers and other leads through my coaching and consulting of them. So that's the structure, and those are our agile BPI teams. I will add, is it the next slide? that we now have more smaller scale teams and work groups that are popping up throughout our department, which is really awesome. These are some of our real team members. You can see how happy they are. That's genuine. I'm telling you right now, that is genuine happiness right there. They really enjoy what they do, because if any of you have come up through your organization and you were on the front lines touching processes, wondering, could we do this better? Is there a more innovative way to do this? Do I really have to make 40 copies and put them in this archive box in this closet over here? A lot of us were those folks coming up through the ranks. We were touching those processes and constantly wondering if we could do it better. And now they have this voice. We have this wonderful methodology that we use that we're implementing throughout our department. So some of my smaller groups, they will just come to me when they need to map a process. We don't actually know what we're doing, but we don't know how to put it in writing. How do you do that, right? We need to identify some bottlenecks, but we're not really sure. So some of them are just, their main assignment is just map out your process and see exactly what you do from from start to end. So those are our teams and work groups at EDD.
All right, excellent. And I think I'll jump in here on this next one. Don't go too far, Janine. So a little bit about the process, because the people is absolutely the most important part of this whole equation. You've got to find people that you can play to their strengths. You got to make sure that you have the appropriate leadership infrastructure in place. And a big part of that, just to be clear, was making sure that everybody had a voice, but not everybody had a vote. Right? Because usually in government, what we have is anybody can pocket vote anything. If they just sit on it long enough, it just kind of dies. And we don't want these project teams to be where dreams go to die. We want them to go where dreams like go to live. So all of the stuff that Janine just talked about is very important from a leadership perspective. Coupled with that also has to be the process to match the people side of it. And so using an agile approach, what we would do is in these 30-day increments, as Janine was talking about, to get this sense of purpose, get this sense of speed, and also deal with some of the risk aversion by doing only small things at a time, not trying to blow up everything at once, which freaks people out. So it's like, okay, if I only have 30 days to come up with a solution, I really can't break that much stuff, right? So, and then that gave us a sense of momentum. So in our very first 30 days, that's the traditional initiation and plan stage. We're building out that team. We're identifying the roles and responsibilities around decision making, which in and of itself ends up being a fairly large change management effort. We're doing some very simple training, and you can go to a week long or 2 months long of Lean Six Sigma. Yes, I have a black belt. I got it at Costco. You can do a lot of training in this space, and it's all great stuff. But if you have 100 tools but you don't know how to use them, that's not all that great. So we train them on like 4. And we say, look, when you've mastered these 4 and you've delivered millions and millions of dollars and hundreds and thousands of days of delay, right, then we'll start looking at more exotic tools. So we focus on the few simple things, and then we start taking the complexity of our business, because while every transaction you do is unique, each one only follows a single path. They may all follow different paths, but each one only follows a single path. So we slice it into the scenarios, and then we just tackle them one scenario at a time, and that's how we manage the overwhelming complexity that exists in all of our typical business processes. And then from there on, from 1 to N, and this is intended to continue in perpetuity, because innovation is a continuous quality thing, not a one-time event. We're doing 30-day slices where we grab a sample of data, we analyze it, we come up with a simple solution recommendation that we can do that's within our sphere of influence, and then we promote that, advocate it, and implement it. And then we do it again the next 30 days. So tiny little slices that build time over time. This is a visual of that same process. We're taking a simplified version of the DMAIC model out of Lean Six Sigma and basically saying, how do you compress that down into a 30-day window? So the first day of a sprint, the team is defining their scenario. Okay, I want an example when a customer with one blue eye and one brown eye comes in, right? And they have this kind of a claim, or they have this kind of a case, or they have this kind of a situation, and I'm only gonna look at that set. And that way we're able to simplify the overwhelming complexity of our world. So we take that slice, and then we collect some data. If we've got a SaaS implementation in the back end, great, we get some great data out of that. Oftentimes, our collection data is we go and we sit down and have a chair chat. And I'm observing somebody do that process who does that kind of work, and I'm just seeing how is it going for them. And I might be using my old-fashioned stopwatch and a pen and paper. So whatever the level of sophistication, doesn't matter, is you collect the data. As you start collecting the data, you start looking at, hey, where's that bottleneck? What are those root causes that are going on? And then we start teasing out, okay, what's a simple solution that could help address that? And then we recommend it. We have kind of a short version of an issue paper, a presentation that goes to the executive team, and we say, okay, here is the data, here's where we think the bottleneck is, here's our recommended solution to just nip that one a little bit and move it by a few percentage points. Permission to proceed. Yay, right? And then they say go, and we implement it, and then we have performance measures that we look at over the next couple of months to say, all right, did we get that incremental improvement or not? So that's kind of the process. And as I mentioned, the tools, there's a million tools out there, and all of them have their day in place. We only focus on just a few. So we do a Pareto chart to kind of be able to look at what's the frequency. So we're focusing on those areas with the biggest ROI. Our data collection plans are fairly straightforward. We use two major types of process maps, and you'll hear me use this acronym throughout, so I thought I would define it up front. A basic SIPOC map, which is supplier, input, process, output, customer. So we're trying to, and we start with the customer side, even though we pronounce it SIPOC. So it's who is our customer, what's the product that they get, and working our way back upstream. And then a value stream map so we can get the data that matches along with that, so we can see at each step in the process how much time is it taking from the customer's perspective, how much resources is it taking from our perspective. And then a basic issue paper template, a recommendation template, and an implementation plan template. And those all integrate then, of course, what's most important is not just the technical parts of the solution, but also the communication plans, the education, and the change management, so that if you update a manual, if you change a process, then the policy actually becomes practice. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about what we do that's kind of unique is the 6 steps to business process innovation. So this allows us to make sure we focus surgically on those areas of the highest value. So I'm going to ask two of my volunteers that I talked about. I need one other volunteer to come on up to kind of help me do this illustration. So I need at least 3 volunteers to come on up. Paul, you know I'm looking at you. Shannon, you know I'm looking at you, even though I've got my ear to you right now. And I need one more person from this side of the house to be able to match up. Right? Would you come on up, miss? Thank you. And it's Nicole. All right, so let's give a big round of applause to these courageous change agents. You should be. All right, so if you could grab that in the middle, Nicole, there, and there you go, Paul. Excellent. So this is the organizing metaphor that we try to do when we look at innovation in an incremental fashion, right? Because transformation doesn't always have to be just huge. It can just be little surgical laparoscopic surgeries, and that has less impact on the patient. They recover quickly, and it's frankly cheaper. So this is a typical business process, let's just say, like links in a chain. Right now, yes, most businesses are way more complex than this, but like I said, every transaction only goes through one path. So we're looking right now at just a single scenario, one type of a case where we're serving a customer, whether it's internal or external to our department. So there's all these little steps that have to happen along the way. So what we do to look at how we can improve this is the first thing is we need to map it. Because yes, we can see this chain right now in real life, but most business processes are hidden, right? It's workflow that's running around all these pipes that are hidden behind walls and in servers and on people's desks. You can't see it. So we do a little high-level map to kind of help visualize it so we can all look at the same page. Then the second step, and this is one we often skip, is we have to set what our goal is. We have to say, what do we want this to do differently than it is today? Rather than just nipping at it or just complaining about it or just throwing ideas against it, we want to be strategic and say, what specifically needs to happen here? Is it that we need to reduce the turnaround time? Is it that the turnaround time is fine, but we have too many quality errors that go out the door? Is the problem that, everything's great, but it costs us a fortune, it's not allowing us to do other things? So we need to be real specific about what do we want from a business perspective out of this process. And you got to start with the goal first, because if you start with the solution first, well, then you always will short yourself on the goal. All right, you got to start with what your dream is and then work towards it, not what you think you can do, because you will always sell yourself short. So the third step then is to identify the bottleneck. So in this chain here, right, there's a lot of things going on. Which link is it that determines the overall strength of this chain? It's the weakest link, right? There's one link in here somewhere that determines the weakest link. Now, if I make a mistake and I just start trying to improve all of them, I'm going to blow a lot of money, right? Let's say Nicole here, she's good at selling, right? And she's got some great data, and she has some wonderful ideas about how she can make her links better and prettier and lighter and higher tensile strength and all this great stuff. And she's got swag, and she's got compromising photos of executives. Like, she's on the inside track. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, right? This is what we're talking about, right? And so she's pitching, hey, put money in my area and I will make it happen. And as an executive, not knowing any better, I'd be like, yeah, girl, you go. And I'd throw her some money or give her some latitude or whatever. And she would make this area better, and she would say, look, this is 20% stronger and 20% lighter and whatever. And we'd be like, yay, Nicole, you're awesome. From a customer's perspective, what happened? Nothing. But it's all about me, right? And then Paul's like, wait, I want me some of that. And then here I am as an executive. I've got all these wonderful change agents clamoring for resources. And hey, give me this, give me that. And I'm like, I want to support you. I want to unleash you. And I'm trying. But the customer's not seeing any difference. Why not? Because what are the odds that what she's pitching is the bottleneck? If there's 100 steps in here, we got 1 out of 100 shot, right? And so even though she made it better, it doesn't matter because it still was going to break at the same place it's always broke. So what we do is we look and say, okay, where is it in the bottleneck here? And guess where it is? And you may not be able to see it in this slide, but over here we got a few chains that let's just say have seen better days. All right, they're a little rusty, a little crusty, a little, something's going on here. Now I want to be clear, it's the bottleneck in the process, not the person. Because she's been over here just killing herself, right? And you may be, the very first step in this process, you may be the very last step in the process, and you're just like the little kid putting their finger in the dam trying to hold it together, right? And you've been saying this for years, but you didn't have those compromising photos. So, she may have not gotten the attention that she, whatever. So we want to say, let's identify it, and we're going to look at it and say, okay, if we double the throughput here, it's not going to matter because it's going to run right into a brick wall right here. So we're very surgical about it. And so once we've identified, wow, this is the bottleneck, right? And then she's like, great, okay, that means I'm going to get more resources. And we say, nope, because there ain't none, in case you haven't figured that out yet. We work for the government, right? Well, the federal government can print their own money, but we can't, right? So she's going to be like, that means no, I'm not throwing resources at it. Before I give her anything, it's just like with my kids. When you ask for more, have you eaten what's on your plate? Right? So I'm going to work with my client here, and Shannon in this case, and say, Shannon, what is it that you're doing with the resources you have now? What is it that you're doing with the process you have now? Before we go changing laws, before we try to change technology, before we throw more bodies at it, is there anything we can do with what we already have to make that faster? Because a 2% improvement in the bottleneck does what overall? It's 2% better for the customer. Right? Because that's the critical constraint. It's a physics thing, you guys. I'm not making this stuff up, right? And so if we can squeeze 2% more out of this, well, that's 2% we've been getting to the customer right here, right now. And that also frees up potentially some resources. We can do some other things with it. So the first step when we talk about solutions is getting the most out of the current bottleneck, right? Don't make me go to Congress to lobby for a law change if you're not doing what you need to be doing right now. And there's always something. And oftentimes the solutions are like, oh, the people that are working on it have never been properly trained. Oh, the people who are walking on it are not following the current procedures that they were supposed to be trained on. Oh, the way we're doing it right now has not been communicated effectively. So and those are things that are within your sphere of influence to change. So we do the best we can with the current. After we've done that, then she's like, okay, now do I get some more resources? And the answer is no. What are you thinking, silly? Come on. Right now what we're going to do is we're going to go upstream or downstream and say if there's anywhere where we're producing more than what that can handle, we slow it down. Doesn't mean I have the people slow down. It means I have the process slow down. So you're over here, you're sending 100 a day, 100 a day, 100 a day, or maybe it's 100 a year, whatever it is. And she's like, come on, get with it. And she's like, bam, bam, bam. And there's this huge backlog just forming, right? So before I throw bodies here, the reality is I'm creating an inventory waste right here. And so what I'm going to look at is and say, okay, is there something we can change here to get it to pace with what she's doing? Now, I'm not going to fire anybody. Don't worry about that, right? But we're going to look at, can we reallocate? Is there something you guys could do differently? And maybe I want to reallocate them to this. Maybe I want to reallocate them to like my own other innovations that I've got planned on. Now, if I reduce her, if she's doing 100 a day and she can only do 20, let's just say, and if I lower her team down so that her team is now doing 20 a day, how many are going out to the customer? 20 a day. When she was doing 100 a day, how many were going to the customer? 20 a day. So notice what I just did. No impact to the customer. So I've freed up some resources that I can now do something with. That's like I just got my own BCP approved. And I now get to redeploy them accordingly. So we have to think strategically about this, right? And then once I've got those resources freed up, what can I do with it? Well, now I can go to step 6. Now I can reinvest that and then maybe put them on a special project team. Maybe have them work on a technology upgrade. Maybe have them rewrite the manual. Maybe have them do a mentor program. Maybe have them update whatever it is. All the great ideas you have right now that you say you never have time for, right? It's because there's only one part in your system that's going to choke everything up. Anything else above that is excess expense. So we can, and that's within our own control to free that up and reallocate it. So those 6 steps are very important to make sure we do it in that order. Otherwise, we'll just start throwing money everywhere, and the customer won't see any more benefit, but our budgets will keep rising and rising and rising, and our technology implementations will get longer and more complicated. That doesn't sound like that's happened recently, has it? Let's thank our guest here. Good job, you guys. Thank you, Paul. And Nicole, you'll get that check next month.
Next month.
That's right, that's right. Well, it takes me a while to get through procurement. So what I'm going to do here now is bring Janine back up to talk a little bit more in detail about each of those steps, and we're going to give you some examples of what we did on the UI team going through those 6-step processes. So Janine, you want to talk a little bit about mapping the system?
Okay, so when we map a system at EDD, you can imagine, and using the Google Maps analogy, do most of you use Google Maps? You know, you can go in, and then when you first get in there, it's like that national map level, and you got to zoom in depending on what state or city you're going into. Well, we have maps that we use to capture those various levels because there's different audiences that we're going to be using these maps with. And I'll tell you right now, one of the challenges that we have is when we have to get into the in the weeds, detailed, right? And we go to our subject matter experts. I'm coaching someone through who's put so much detail in a high level, quote unquote, map that I think the font is like 6 font. So I was explaining to her, and she's like, no, the executives need to know. They need to know. Nope. We're going to start off with what we call an enterprise SIPOC. It's a very high-level map. I'll tell you right now, most executives that I work with, that's what they want to see first. So we start at that level, and we work our way down. And as we're working our way down, because you have to map that high-level process first. And it's amazing when we went into the UI program and then also in DI, how we got it done pretty quickly, but it was amazing the different perspectives on what was considered high level and what wasn't. So that was part of my role as the project manager on that effort to help people zoom in and out accordingly. And that can be a challenge. It's trial and error. So then we use our process level SIPOC. That's when we start getting into a little bit more detail. And Lee's going to show you some examples that we used at EDD. One of my favorites, because I'm really big on data-driven decisions, is we take that process SIPOC map and we use something called a value stream map. That's where we start looking and dropping in data. And the things that we look for are inventory backlog, we look for our overall throughput. So we'll start capturing that. The way we capture that is we go out and we actually watch the process as it happens. We go out into the field, we sit with our employees, we have them process claims or whatever it is that the process that we're looking at, and we capture our data in real time. I have many people who have tried to talk me out of mapping a process because they're like, no, I used to do that. I did that like 10 years ago. I can tell you exactly what the process is, right? No, we need to see it like today. And when we go out and map the process, we map it at varying levels of talent and skill set, right? We bring in our new employees, we bring in our journey level employees, we bring in the folks that are like, oh, I can do this in my sleep, so that we can get a good sense of what the average time is. So we drop all that information into a value stream map, scenario value stream map, and sometimes we have to get in and we'll pull out a very specific scenario and start looking at, all right, let's do a value stream map on this one tiny little step in the process. So those are some of the maps that we use mostly at EDD. So this is a high-level enterprise SIPOC that we did. It was one of our first assignments as a team when we came together, and it took us a few days, but it was a lot of discussion. Everyone had a different perspective on what high level was, and there were so many folks that were like, but you left out this and you left out this. Yes, that's because it's high level. We have each of these boxes here have their own process maps, like multiple process maps, because we're looking at varying layers and we're zooming in and out. So one of the things that our project was focusing on was the filing a claim, but more specifically it was for our first, it's called first payment promptness. So it's our initial claim filing process for the folks that are filing for unemployment insurance that first time. So that's what we focused on for our particular project. One of the things that we do is we have to really look at, well, what paths can all of these claims take as they're going through a process? You got to start with your happy path. DOL told us what our happy path was. Department of Labor told us that when a claimant files a claim within 14 days of the first compensable week, they need to be getting a payment, basically. So they told us what our happy path should be. So that's the fastest, simplest, most desirable outcome. And then you have the alternate path. So they will veer off a little bit, right? They're a little bit more complicated. Maybe there's some manual intervention, but they still make it with whatever the desired time frame is. So we call that an exception. It veered off the happy path, but it still made it in time. And then that red, that's like exceptions. These are people who were getting paid like we'll just say outside of the 14 days, okay? So those were the exception paths. And so those are the buckets, if you will. That's what we call them. It's like those are the 3 main buckets that our claims go through. Now, obviously, with serving so many customers, there are so many intricate scenarios that so many of those can take. I mean, there's very varying factors there. But it's important to be able to kind of categorize in these 3 main buckets. So this is a process level. So this is a real SIPOC that one of my team members put together. We always have a start and an end point. And I'll tell you, these start and end points are really critical when you're talking to leadership, because when you start to share a map and someone says, wait a minute, that process isn't represented here, you can tell them, well, it's not, because we were only mapping to this particular point in the process. So always know your start and end point. We like to show the supplier input, process, output, customer. I've seen other styles of flow charts and maps. They're great if they work for you. That's great. We like this because it helps us really identify who our suppliers are, the input. So here it's a claimant that's going to, through various channels, be able to move information to us. So they can do it through mail, they can do it online, or through the telephone. I think there was a fourth one, fax. At the time, we cut the bottom off. The middle section is the process, very high level. Like I said, each of those boxes has an additional process map that is breaking that process down in detail. Then you have your output, which is a payment, and then you have your customer. So a lot of times our supplier and our customer are pretty much the same on both ends. All right, am I doing Pareto chart?
I think this one is mine.
Okay.
Yep. So the Pareto chart here is, okay, as Janine was saying, this is a high-level process, and you might be a legal team that's handling cases, and you may only do 12 of these a year, or you might be like we're at UI, where you're doing millions of these a year. So, but regardless, you have each one, again, has its own variety and flavor. So this is a way of kind of slicing it down into these scenarios, the happy path scenarios, the alternate scenarios, the exceptions, and then we can lay those out in a Pareto chart and say, okay, with what frequency do these occur? Because we're not going to solve everything at once, especially if we're working, again, in 30-day increments. So we'll look at the layout of it, and we always start with the happy path just to get our teeth cut and start learning things, because that's also like the base Lego unit for everything else. And so if you make the happy path faster, everything else gets a little bit faster. And then you look at how frequently these other scenarios happen, and you progressively just work, okay, this particular alternate scenario happens, the most frequently. Well, we're going to focus on that one first. And then there's this one weird exception thing that happens once every 28 years, and months that end with the letter K and have a silent G in them. And you're like, okay, when those happens, then we'll just call Francesca and she'll handle it. All right, but we're not going to throw resources at trying to improve that because it doesn't have the ROI. So then we define our goal, and that was the second step in our process that we talked about. And really, we got to think about your goals in a certain priority order. The first question you need to ask before you try to improve it is, do we even still need it? And I know this sounds kind of crazy because some people pitch their life in writing this particular report that they've done for 20 years, and they're really good at it. But before we try to figure out a way to make that report faster or add new features, we have to see, has anybody actually ever looked at it in the last 10 years? And believe me, I have found that where I'm like, tell me who, so we send it to someone, it's like, I know that's who you send it to, get me that person on the phone and ask a question about what's in there and see if they've even looked at it. Because if they haven't, we're gonna just stop sending it. All right, now don't stop producing it, right? But one way to test this, you just stop sending it for a little while, and if they don't call, you're done, right? If they call, you go, oops, my bad, and then you send it. So you still have it on call, right? Don't just shut the whole thing down. I'm not stupid. But relevance, you gotta start with that first. Then second to that, and most commonly, is then they want it faster. Most of the citizens of government, when you're looking at the services, they're not sitting in traffic, beeping their horn mad because their gas tax is too high. Right? They're mad because they're not getting where they want to go. They're not getting their form. They're not getting their inspection report. Whatever service it is that they're looking for government, they want it now. And so we have to focus first on getting it faster. The problem is most innovation projects start with making it what? Cheaper. Hey, how can we cut some jobs here? Great, let's rally the team on that one. Not the best place to start, right? It's like, look, we have resources, right? And the people have willingly or with some encouragement paid their taxes, whatever that fee is. Let's put good use around that. Let's be good stewards of the resources we have by delivering it faster first. Then we can look at making it better, adding new features, dealing with defects. But honestly, even an unemployment insurance claimant, they'd rather get something sooner, even if it's a little bit wrong, rather than making sure it's perfect to the 100th place in the cents column, right? It's like we can clean that up later if need be, but get it out the door. So this emphasis on speed is very important in helping to transition out of, that's where total quality ran into problems. We try to make everything perfect, and then that means you didn't get much of anything done, right? And so we want to focus on getting it out the door to our customers because that's what matters most to them. And oh, guess what? Lo and behold, it always ends up making it cheaper. And then you're able to reallocate those resources as appropriate. So there's 3 key performance indicators we look at when we're assessing a process, and we kind of mentioned these earlier. One is throughput. right? That's the overall turnaround time end to end for that particular customer. So if we're going to focus on faster first, we've got to be looking at how much product is going out the door, whether it's decisions that are made, calls answered, claims processed, whatever it is in your world, that's what throughput means to us. The second thing is, of course, what's the operational cost? And the operational cost is the total cost to produce that business value, including all the defects, the reworks, and the mistakes, right? We often try to exclude those when we're doing our funky accounting games, and we don't get a true representation of the total cost of a process. And then lastly is the inventory. Right? What is our backlog? What is the number of units that are waiting to get worked on? And so in that chain example that we talked about, if I can create a map of that, and then I say, okay, our goal is to make it faster, and I measure these three things, I can know where the bottleneck is. If I see stacks of inventory showing up somewhere, I know the bottleneck's somewhere around there. Right? As we implement solutions and we're testing, did it increase throughput or not? It did not increase throughput. Well, then that wasn't a bottleneck. We got to go back and try it again. But just these three metrics are really all we need to know when we're doing process improvement. So we say data is important, but not all data is equally important. These are the three that we need to focus on. So that gets us to, now that we've got this data, we've collected it, we're looking at it, now we can, with like eagle-eye precision, pick out those bottlenecks to go after. And a bottleneck can be something, it's any part of the system that sets the total maximum throughput. Right, so just like on a freeway, if you've got 6 lanes and then it goes to a bridge and then it goes back to 6 lanes, ain't no point in adding a 7th lane on the 6-lane portion of it. You're not going to improve the overall commute time for your customers. So similarly in our business processes. And usually the bottleneck we find is most often either something around a policy, some decision that was made by somebody who's probably not there anymore 20 years ago. And that could be a law level, those are kind of the real ones. It could be a procedure, how we think we should implement it, or it could be a practice. And I'm telling you, those three almost never match. It's like, well, why are you doing it that way? Well, the law says, like, where in the law did it say you had to staple it with your eyebrows? And it's like, well, that's how my manager taught me. And it's like, okay, did they really show me? So just you got to say, where is it in the law? And oftentimes it's the law is a bunch of nonsense, right? And so we want to say, and then you look in the manual, and the manual didn't tell you to do it that way, and guess who writes the manual? We do. So even if the manual does say it to do it with your eyebrows, then we can change it because we wrote the manual. All right. So those are different ways that we can potentially find various bottlenecks. So how do you find it? We create that map. We define our goal. Collect some data, and by sample data, I'm not talking about tens of thousands. I'm talking like 20. Show me 20 examples of this. 100 is great. That's more than enough, right? Take a small sample. We calculate those three key, like how long does it take? How many people are working on that? What's the backlog? And then I can identify those locations where there's tons of waste happening. And then I can go surgically in there and start asking this, my favorite question. This is one of the best Lean Six Sigma tools we can teach, and my 3-year-old daughter is actually already a master at it, and that's asking why. And you got to do it 5 times. Why, Daddy? Why? Why? It's like, no, you need to eat. Why do I need to eat the green beans? Well, because I said so. Why do you say so? What does that matter? Mom seems to be really one of the boss in this house, right? So you got to ask why 5 times, and then you get to the root of it, right? And it's almost always some management decision that was made sometime. To protect against an issue that happened to somebody. And we can just say, well, is that issue still happening? Is that risk still there? And maybe it's time for us to adjust it. So here's an example of just one bottleneck. So here, and don't worry about the details on it, but the system has received a claim and it's flagged it to say, hey, something seems weird here. We got to look at it closer. All right, and then they schedule it for an internal employee, an EPR in this case, to be able to conduct an interview and say what's going on with it. So we looked at it, and there's, we could look at, hey, let's make the system faster. Let's throw technology at it. There was a ton of things in there. We said, well, but of the days of delay that we're dealing with, 12 of them is between the time the system knows it needs to happen and the time somebody can actually talk to that claimant. 12 and a half days. And remember, we have 14 days to do this, folks. So I don't leave a whole lot of wiggle room. So we're like, hey, before we start talking about throwing around technology, what can we do to snip at that guy? And so here are some of the solutions that they came up with. So we looked at it and we said, wow, 32% of the things that are going down that pipe was just to clarify something on the application. Right? It was like it was there. We just wanted, hey, can we just double check that your name actually is what you said it is, or is that like a joke? Right? I mean, usually more serious than that, but I mean, just it's a clarification. And so we asked, well, why are we asking those clarifying questions like 5 times? What's going on with there? And what we found out is that, well, the claimants themselves and the people filing it were confused about the rules. And we were like, okay, well, what can we do to reduce that confusion? So we did some internal training, and we would do these tiny little 15-minute training bites, as we'd call it, that would go out to the folks doing this, say, hey, this is a common question that we're getting, a common confused response that we're getting. Here, this is how you do it. So we just did some training internally. And then we also clarified some things on the website. And some of those things we could just update the website, and others we needed the IT branch to be able to jump in and help with us. So we said, okay, let's work on what we can do now, and that was phase one. And then we said, okay, these other ones might have to do some application changes in the back end, and we'll get to those when we have resources to do that. So we rolled that out, and basically for those clarification-only calls, we were able to reduce that 12.5 days by 10 days, right? So they were getting turned around in 2 days. We were able to avoid 10,000 defective calls that never should have been coming into us in the first place, which saved us on the phase one solution alone about $124,000 a year. This was to do like a 15-minute training out to our claim folks and change a few words on a website. Like that's very small change, very good size impact. And in the phase two, when we get around to it, and I don't know if we have yet or not, because IT's been kind of backed up as well, you know, we're looking at potentially $15 million a year in saving. Now, the funny thing is when you say, hey, IT, could you do this? Oh, we're kind of busy. It'd save $15 million a year. It was funny how that moved up the priority list. But that's an example of, again, targeting the bottleneck. So I mentioned earlier that before we throw technology at it, before we lobby Congress for things, before we throw bodies at it, we've got to make sure we've been good stewards with the resources we already have. So what's within our sphere of influence that we can do faster, better, cheaper? And a big part of that might be if you're the bottleneck and you're only able to do 20 a day, and you've only got 20 resources, what we find hysterical is that of those 20 resources, 5 of them may be out somewhere else on special projects. And 3 of them are organizing the social events for the department, you know, and 2 of them are, you know, you're like, don't move those resources. Like if you have 20 of them, make sure you're getting 20's worth of work out of it. And you're like, well, but they're helping so and so and so. It's like, they're not the bottleneck. All right, so use 100% of the resources you currently have at the bottleneck. It's amazing how much that'll improve your throughput. So that's step one. And then also want to make sure that the people and the resources and the equipment at that bottleneck is well trained and supported. Right? Because if they're doing it wrong, you're not going to get yourself out of it. Don't train everybody in the world on how they can do it better. Focus on just that team. And we're looking at about 8 types of waste. And you know, I'm using a wine metaphor here because I think this is what will resonate with most of us. But wherever you've got where it's at the bottleneck, these are the 8 types of things that we see. We see that there's defects going through, and those are usually pretty obvious. We also sometimes see overproduction. I ordered 500 forms just in case we needed them. And we'll get through it over the next 10 years, right? You're like, no, that you're producing too much. Waiting, that's obviously delays between steps, right? So when it's just sitting there waiting for somebody to get on it. So if it's in your inbox, that's waiting. Non-utilized talent, have somebody who's amazing at doing a particular thing working on one part of the system and not leveraging their strengths. Transportation, you know, when you have paper files that are being shuttled all over the state and mailed, you know, what can we do to compress the transportation time? Inventory, all those things that have started but are partially done. And then motion, just, you know, running around the office looking for things and excessive searching to find stuff online, not having a well-organized SharePoint site that Kiefer Consulting helped you put together. You know, and then extra processing. Right, that was for you, Greg. Extra processing, right, where it's like, okay, you guys, it's already at the 99.9999%. Like, well, we're just going to check it one more time, you know, or to make sure that it's not a fraudulent thing, we're going to have 700 layers of approval, right, you know, on a $5 purchase, because having that many people look at it, you know, increases the quality somehow, right? So extra processing. So all of these things are present, and most of us, our eyes are only trained to 1 or 2. But here's it is by the numbers. And we've got about 5 minutes, Janine. So do you want me to take this one, or do you want to blow through it? Okay. So here's an example of, we were looking at the clean claim scenario. It was the simplest scenario we could come up with. And what we found was that when we did it online, it took about a day. And if they did it through the mail, it took 3.5 days. And of those 3, days of that was it in the mail, right? So we had transportation waste. It's like they're mailing it to us. We're like, let's get more people to go online. We already have a system. We have capacity. What can we do to get more folks doing it online? And what we looked at, the data, we found that 80% of our claimants start out online. They do their initial application online. And we're like, great. And then they stop going online. They start sending us paper. So it's not that they don't have access to a computer. They started on a computer and then they left. And we're like, why are they leaving? It's so much faster. It's faster for them. It's cheaper for us. Why not do it more online? So we did some research and we asked why 5 times. And we found out the reason they go back to paper is because we tell them to. Every step in the process where they're interacting with is like, okay, and the next step is you'll get this form and then you'll need to mail it back to us, even though we had a technology solution available. right? And so they're like, okay, and that's what they did. So clever us, we tried, previously we had tried Facebook campaigns, social media, flyers telling them, don't do this, but all the micro messaging was still saying, fill out the form or call us. So we changed the micro messaging, and so we just adjusted a few keywords, and over the first 3 months, we had about 600,000 free marketing impressions saying subliminally, go online, go online. It was like, hi, what's your name? Go online, right? What's your last name? Go online. Right, and that's just what we did, and it went from 20% online to 26% over a short period of time, and that continues to climb. Right now, 6% doesn't sound like a lot, right? But it didn't cost us a lot either, right? Whereas our large campaigns, which were fairly expensive, did nothing. So being able to look at what can we do at the bottleneck. And so the last few steps here that we'll wrap up with, again, aligning work to pace with the bottleneck. So that bottleneck limits your maximum throughput. So don't start things you're not going to be able to finish. And certainly don't send defects on down the line. So let's take a closer look at what that looks like. So here was a scenario. This is a value stream map. And we were looking at a very complex situation, but we were looking at the quality rate. And we found, and that's not the defect rate, that's the quality rate, right? So 5 to 0 to 9% of the time, they were doing it according to the procedure when we looked at it. And we were like, what is going on here? So we did this little survey, and we took some really hardworking, solid people, and we said, okay, faced with this scenario, how would you handle it? And 11% of the time, they got it right. We were like, oh goodness, what's happening here? So we found out that they were working really hard to do what they thought was the right thing, right? They're not lazy bums. They were busting their butts trying to make this happen. But they didn't know that, and it was faster at their step in the process, but it was creating this huge, I can't say it on video, huge problem downstream that they weren't aware of it. So we connected those dots, did some education, clarified why we're doing it this way. And lo and behold, by changing that, we had a 32% reduction in turnaround time. So claimants were getting their things 10 days faster, saved us a bunch of money. All right, just by connecting dots, by looking upstream of the bottleneck, say, why are we getting all these defects clogging things up? Another one on reinvesting the savings. So you start to shuffle some things around, and that frees up some space so that you can then actually do more exotic solutions, right? That you can now self-fund. And that's what this team's gotten the luxury of being able to do now because of that. So now we can start going after the policies themselves. Now we can start changing the actual procedures. So a lot of the other solutions are just communication, education, small little tweaks that gives you some breathing room. So now you can say, okay, about this policy we've had for 10 years, let's advocate to the legislature or somebody else it's time to change. About updating this manual, okay, I know that's a big deal. All right, we've got some space now, we've had some successes. What if we actually change the manual now? All right, and that buys you the goodwill to be able to implement those changes. And only after you've really improved the process should you ever even bother talking to anybody about technology, equipment, or more resources. Because if you're asking for those things before you've done the process, you are not being a good steward. You're being that bratty kid that says, I want more, I want more, I want more, and you haven't eaten what's already on your plate. So just to close up with this last example, one last scenario. A person conducting a determination, which is one of the steps in the process. They're on the phone for 17 minutes, and then if they don't finish it, then they can come back later, and it takes another 11 minutes to finish it up. So what's the total turnaround time? You guys help me out, do the math. What's the total turnaround time there? 20 minutes. Yeah, 4 days. Because what would happen is because they didn't have that 10 minutes, it would go in a file and then it would wait for 3.5 days before they were able to get back to it. So for want of 10 minutes, the claimant lost 4 days. Now, some of them, there were rules where we had to wait. Okay, that's great, but that didn't apply to all of them, right? And so we took a closer look here and we said, okay, now this is a little more exotic solution. This is right at the bottleneck. Now this is what's happening at the EPR's desk. And starting putting together, like, what are the most common forms? Where are you spending your time? Just watching them. And as they're filling out those forms, they're moving all over the place. They're scrolling up, they're scrolling down. And the low performers were manually retyping in the same thing over and over and over again, taking them forever. And then we'd go watch Rod and be like, Rod, how is it that you can do 10 times as much as anybody? And he had a little Excel spreadsheet that he put together with common phrases and patterns, and he would just copy and paste those, and he'd just rip them out in a fraction of the time. So we took that best practice, updated the forms. So these, again, larger solutions, updating forms and educating employees, right? And then that allowed us to, again, expand their capacity so that if we could get that job done within that first 17-minute window, then we would save 4 days of delay, all right? And so that's just an example, again, of a solution. So with that, I want to thank you guys all for your attention today. Again, just trying to touch on what's possible And if you really get a dedicated team of folks together who have some passion, have some great leadership backing, are able to throw together small slices of some good analytical techniques, and wow, a year and a half later, I'm happy to say, they are within 0.5% now of meeting their federal mandates, and they're 2,000 people less than they were then. So it can be done. They're doing it. That makes me a believer. Thank you.